Welcome to Radical Personal Finance. Today on the podcast, listener question from Brazil. Renato writes in and says, "Hi, Joshua. I hope you and your family are doing well." Well, I'm doing better now. Last week, I was knocked down in bed for a day and had a cough that, as best I could determine from careful diagnosis, began in my left pinky toe and continued up and out my mouth, and that pretty well knocked me out, especially from recording podcasts. So I'm doing better now and happy to be back on the microphone. Thank you. I have a question that I would like your thoughts on. I know you're currently living outside the United States and have considered moving back to provide better opportunities for your children. For context, I am from Brazil. My income places me in the top 2% of earners here. However, Brazil and the world are facing challenging times. While my wealth in reais, which is the Brazilian pronunciation for the Brazilian real, while my wealth in reais has remained stable or even increased, I've become at least 35% poorer in dollars due to rapid currency devaluation. I enjoy a good life in Brazil, living in a gated community in a safe town near Sao Paulo, predominantly populated by Italian descendants. My child attends a great Waldorf school run by parents, and I have a close relationship with his teacher. However, I feel compelled to consider moving to the United States to give my son a better chance at success. Better chance at success. The low income in Brazil and the high cost of living for a middle-class lifestyle are major concerns. Despite my top 1% income, being in the top 10% in Brazil is not impressive. For example, earning 6,000 reais, about $1,050, places you in the top 10%. My wife, a university teacher at top schools, earns about 10,000 reais, $1,750, while my associate's wife, a senior PR professional, earns about 12,000 reais, $2,100. They are both in the top 5% of Brazilian incomes, but earn less than a teenager flipping burgers in Florida. Additionally, most goods and services are more expensive in Brazil than in the United States, except for food and some services. I can reasonably expect my son to be in the top 10% due to the education I provide, but can I truly hope for him to reach the top 1%? Being only in the top 10% in Brazil often means struggling to afford travel, cars, technology, private schools, and healthcare. He is currently 12 years old. In one of your shows, you mentioned the challenges of uprooting teenagers. Would you consider moving back to the United States? If so, when would you move? Now for high school or later for college? I'm looking into E2 or EB3 visas. The E2 takes about a year, requiring me to start a business in the United States, which would allow my whole family to move, but is semi-temporary. The EB3 takes 4 years and would require me to work in a low-skilled job for a year, but it grants a green card for the entire family. What are your thoughts? Best regards, Renato. Well, Renato, I love this question, and I'm going to do my very best to give you some ideas that I hope will be useful for you. As we begin, though, I want to first talk about my perception of the United States, which will be different than yours. Secondarily, I want to talk about what are those ingredients for success. And then with regard to your specific situation, we might have a better ground to start from. First of all, when I talk about moving back to the United States, you say, would you consider moving back to the United States? The obvious answer to that is yes, I would consider moving back to the United States. I am considering it. I do consider it, and I could happily move back to the United States. The reason for that, however, is due to culture. Culturally speaking, through and through, I'm an American. There's no way for me to go through the world and not look at the world with an American lens. So because of that, the idea of moving back to the United States is a very comfortable idea because I can make friends in about an hour. It's not that hard for me. I can build new social contacts very easily. I can feel very comfortable in just about any one of the 4 or 44 corners of the United States. I believe that this factor of cultural compatibility and comfort has got to be the most impactful decision, the most impactful factor on whether people are happy with their decisions or not. I've spent a lot of time thinking about people who leave the United States, listening to them, talking to them, trying to figure out, who is happy with that, who is not happy with that. On the whole, my observations are that people who leave the United States because they don't like the culture of the United States, and then they go elsewhere and they find another place with a different culture that really just connects with them, those seem to be the people who are the happiest in the long run. And people who leave the United States because taxes are too high or because so-and-so got elected to the presidency and now I'm leaving, they often wind up moving back to the United States after a few years. And in fact, that's how I feel. When I left, I didn't leave because I was mad at the country, but I was mad at the country. I was frustrated. And after about 5 years abroad now, I feel much more relaxed about the country. It's got its good points, got its bad points, just like everywhere. I feel like I can accept those things the way they are, not worry and be frustrated every single day about the things I can't change. Part of that might just be becoming more mature myself, just in general. Part of it is just recognizing with more detachment what's good and bad about the country. You hear when someone divorces their spouse, very rarely is it easy 1 week after for them to give an honest assessment of the good and bad qualities that their ex has. However, 5 years later, 10 years later, they can often reflect with a little bit more detachment and honesty on the qualities that their ex has and comment on those things realistically. So that's how I feel about the United States. So I absolutely could move back to the United States. I would move back to the United States. I also enjoy the adventure of bouncing around the world, and I enjoy that lifestyle for all of its good and bad. But time will tell. At this point in time, I could happily move back to the United States and be content with that decision. Now, what's different about me and you? Well, the difference between me and you is that I can move back at any point in time. So my American citizenship is very valuable to me. Knowing that I can go to the United States is extremely valuable to me, and I'm grateful for it. And why would someone else want to move to the United States? Well, before we get to the opportunity, I think it's just that of any one country, I don't know of any other single country that has all of the unique attributes of the United States, where basically on every list of high performance or qualities that you would be looking for in a country, the United States on the whole, or certainly many areas in the United States, are going to be, if not number one, top five. And that's very hard to find in the world, where one country encompasses so many powerfully positive dimensions. You could talk about it from a financial perspective or from an opportunity perspective. Yes, the United States has huge financial opportunity, tremendous access to wealth, tremendous wealth building potential. Then you could talk about it with, say, something like crime and safety. And the way I look at this, notice I was careful with my words. I said either the United States broadly or places in the United States. The way I look at this is that you can find places in the United States that are just as low crime as almost anywhere else. I was preparing for a talk a while ago, and I was reviewing the data on the lowest crime countries in the world. And for example, the United Arab Emirates is frequently now seen as one of the lowest crime places in the world. And it is. It's very low crime. Anybody who goes to the UAE will come back with stories of how you can just leave your purse or your bag or your laptop or your wallet sitting on the table and it'll be there in an hour when you come back. It's famously low crime. Famously low crime because of very harsh penalties for crime. Now, similarly, however, you're not going to do that in downtown New York City. You're not going to do that in the middle of any American city. But I looked it up, and evidently Maine has the lowest crime rates in the United States. And there are, you can go to a small town in Maine, and you can find crime rates that are comparable to that of the United Arab Emirates. So you say, Joshua, you're cheating. Yes, I'm cheating a little bit, but I'm making the point that the nation has a lot to offer. And so you flip that around and you say, well, what do you have in the United States that Dubai doesn't. Well, you have pretty good freedom of speech, pretty good ability to express yourself and live how you want, and you're generally free of arbitrary detention, things like that. So the America haters won't agree with me, but I think for most fair-minded people, the United States has a lot to offer. And when you put that whole package together in one country, especially one huge country, where you can live in almost any climate zone that you want to live in, any lifestyle that you want to live in, any kind of city, any kind of surrounding, it's a pretty attractive place, especially when you think about what the coming decades may hold for the world. So that's what is uniquely attractive about the United States. And for children, especially, what is comforting about the United States is simply that you don't have to be a unique genius in order to do well in the United States. All you've got to do is just not be stupid and able to basically set a plan and follow it. In some countries of the world, in order for you to really do well financially, you have to develop a powerful set of skills. You have to be uniquely strong in a particular area. You need to be uniquely well educated, uniquely well connected, some aspect like that. In the United States, you can be right square in the mediocre middle in just about everything of life. But if you can get up and go to work and not spend your money foolishly and be okay with a modest but comfortable lifestyle, then you can be a millionaire and multimillionaire in the fullness of time, pretty consistently and pretty reliably. And that's something that's really attractive, because all of us, we all wish that our children were absolute geniuses, but we know that they're not. And so having that basic foundation is pretty attractive as a parent. And while I've gone back and forth and thought about and explored all different aspects of American citizenship, that's one thing that I really appreciate, is it's having an American passport and citizenship and the right to work and live in the United States is some of the best anti-poverty insurance that exists in the world. So those are good reasons to consider going to the United States. Now, what's the problem? As I see it, the problem for you is that life is pretty good where you are. So yes, your wealth has decreased. You've become 35% poorer in dollars due to rapid currency devaluation, but you earn in reais and you spend in reais and you live in reais. And for all we know, that in the future, maybe instead of 35% poorer, it'll be 25% poorer, right? Maybe things will improve. Maybe they get worse. Maybe they improve. We don't know. The truth remains that things are good for you in Brazil. You've got a great setup. You got a great life. You live in a gated community. You live in a safe town. Your wife has a great job. Your child is in a great school. You've got a great income. You've got a great wealth plan. Life is good. And one decision-making model that I refer to practically on a daily basis is this. I am convinced that it is very difficult to make a decision and choose between two good options, or two bad options, or two similar options. Very frequently, people will do like you're doing, ask me for advice on an issue, and immediately I observe that the reason that you're struggling to make a decision is because you have two good options, or again, two bad options. When you have two options, right, you look good in green and you look good in blue, and you're not sure which to wear, it's hard to know. But if you know that you look good in blue and you look catastrophically, horrifyingly ugly in green, well, it's going to be obvious that you're going to choose the blue. And the same thing in life. The reason you're struggling with this decision is that you could see how life in the United States could be good, and you could see how life in Brazil is good. If you didn't have a good life in Brazil, then this decision would be easy, right? If your wealth had just all been stolen and you were completely poor and starting over again, then you would be easy that you would go to the United States. If you were getting bombed every day, then it would be obvious that you would leave and you would go somewhere else. But because life is pretty good here in Brazil and life would be pretty good there in the United States, then you're having a hard time. So I developed a simple way to respond to this that helps me. And this is the framework that I use, that I think about, and that I use to give advice. What can you do when you have two similar options that you can't choose between? Well, you have two basic choices. Choice one is to amplify the options until the differences between them are more obvious to you. That's the first thing you can do. Or find a third choice. Let's go with amplification first. Let's assume that you were certain that not only has your wealth decreased by 35%, measured in dollar terms, but that's just getting started. In reality, you're going to face 1,000% hyperinflation next year in the real. You're going to have so many problems that you're going to be completely flat broke out of wealth. And what's worse is that 2 years from now, even all of your physical property is going to be taxed. You're going to have unrealized capital gains taxes on your valuable property that you own. And there's going to go up exit taxes and capital controls, and you're not going to even be able to get money out at all of Brazil. And so if you were convinced that things in Brazil were going to be that bad, then it would be easier for you to go to the United States because it's obvious that things in Brazil are going to be that bad. Or let's say that you were certain your business in Brazil was going to collapse. Well, now it would be obvious to go. And we can amplify the United States from a positive perspective or from a negative perspective. So let's do the positive first. I did the negative on Brazil. Let's do the positive first. The United States, you could look at it and say, you know what? If I just had a simple, low-skill job in the United States, we could save so much money that we'd be, millionaires within 10 years. We'd be set. Or we would love it. We don't like living in this gated community in Brazil. We just love to live in a modest apartment, but in a college town where we had access to great schools. And my wife, if she could teach at a local university and we could walk there every day, what an amazing experience that would be. So there are things that could be done to amplify the United States. You could imagine the United States 50 years from now as an enormously powerful and rich country, and you totally able to change your family tree because of the wealth that you could generate in the United States and the wealth that your son could generate and for your grandchildren all down the line. So you can amplify the positive. You could also amplify the negative, right? The United States is falling apart. The country is going to collapse in no time. Brazil, on the other hand, we're out of the way of nuclear war. We're down in the south where we've got clean air, clean water. Life is good in Brazil. We're staying in Brazil. So you can amplify either one until you can find the difference. And you should do that. I do that frequently. All in my mind, I just play with various factors. And sometimes they stick and you realize, you know what, that's actually true. And sometimes they don't. Now, the third option, or the other thing you can do, is you can find a third option. And I think this is where you are. I don't think you're going to be able to find a big enough difference that is honest between Brazil and the United States for you and your wife. And I think you're going to be looking for a third option that allows you to get the best of both worlds. And I think that exists in what you're describing to me. Let me pause for just a moment and go back to culture. The United States, in theory, could offer you more money. Income in the United States is high. Life in the United States is cheap, can be cheap. Taxes are relatively low. So the money potential is enormous. Now, Brazil has also a lot of money potential as well. But in the United States, the money potential is big. The problem is that's about the only thing that I picked up on in the note that you sent to me. And what I know from having moved a good bit and traveled a good bit and talked to a lot of people is that money is only a significant driving factor at the margins. If you were totally broke and you were struggling to figure out how to afford groceries this week, then the money would be a big deal and you would be much more serious about moving to the United States. But you're not. You pretty much go to the grocery store, you buy what you want to buy, you don't worry too much about the prices, you go out to eat when you want to go out to eat, life is good for you. So money is not going to be a driving influence. And if you just pick up and move from where all your friends are, where your family is, where all the work that you find meaningful is, and plop down in some random city in the United States, the culture shock is going to be so overwhelming that there's a good chance within a year you're back in Brazil, except that you've lost that year and you've gone backwards. And I think you should be especially cognizant of the needs of your wife. One of the great challenges is, it sounds to me like your wife has a pretty good life. She's got a job she likes. She works at a top university. She's probably quite fulfilled by that work, by the intellectual stimulation. I think she probably really enjoys the social dynamics on a university campus. She's probably surrounded by friends, surrounded by family, surrounded by people she likes being with. And then you earn enough money to make it so that she lives a top 1% lifestyle. She's happy. Life is good. Now imagine you pick her up and plop her down in a random city in the United States where she's got none of that. Imagine she's got no job. She doesn't know how to get a job. She's sitting there at some apartment alone while you're off working some low-skilled job. Imagine she now has no friends. Imagine she has no family. Imagine how frustrating that's going to be for her. Good chance that if you do that without her being really on board with it, you wind up ending your marriage. It happens all the time, and it's one of the saddest things. A guy will get a bee in his bonnet about where he wants to go and what he wants to do there, not think about her and her needs, race off, and she says, I'm out of here. Life was better at home. So be really careful with this. Now, could it be that she's actually with you? Yeah. Imagine she got a job at some very prestigious university in the United States, and she gets the chance to teach and research the thing that she's really interested in. And imagine that she already has a few colleagues from that university that she interfaces with at conferences, and she's excited about going to this university. Well, now all of a sudden everything's different because you could fill in those other details that your family needs and you could move. But you moving for a low-skilled job and her not having one of her own, that sounds like a real problem. And I don't think that your move is going to be sufficiently rewarding to her for your family to be happy. So your problem is that you have two good choices. If you were living in Gaza, thinking about moving to the United States, you would move. If you were living in Luxembourg, thinking about moving to the United States, you wouldn't move, right? Because if everything were just so obviously great and you make lots of money and everything is really great, you wouldn't move. So your problem is that you're in the middle. And I worry that your biggest thing here is not going to be finance, because your wife is probably not motivated by just doing a little bit better. Your wife probably honestly and rightly looks at your son and says, he'll be fine, right? He's smart. He'll be in the top 10%. He's no problem. Brazil has great opportunities. Generally, it's been my experience that women don't seem to work for money as much as men do. They're not as externally motivated by just the dollars. And so if she's looking at it and you say, but honey, we can do 30% better or 50% better, that's probably not going to be persuasive to her because life is pretty good. Now, I would point out for you at the third option that we have three people that we're talking about. We have you, your wife, and your son. So I would encourage you to say, we've got him and we've got us. And in our thinking and in our planning, whether or not he goes to the United States or we go to the United States, these are separate things. And as you pointed out in your question, where you said, if so, when would you move? Now for high school or later for college? There's a big, big difference between those things. To me, the obvious plan here for you to solve your concern over your son's long-term future and for him to have access to the United States is for you to focus on coaching him to be able to relatively easily go to college in the United States, do well there, and then turn that college work in the United States into a relatively straightforward pathway to residency and, in the fullness of time, American citizenship. That, to me, is the third option that would solve the human needs that I'm observing. You didn't write about these things, but I just know that relationships and feeling like you belong and cultural things and all that stuff really matters. And I don't see any reason why you and your wife need to leave Brazil in order to accomplish that. And in fact, I think in many ways you could be more effective at doing that. What's the difference between you being in Brazil versus you being in the United States? Well, if you've got to go to the United States and you've got to start a brand new business to get your E2 visa, or you've got to take a new low-skilled job for your EB3 visa, and you've got to be dedicated to that for 4 years, you're not going to have anywhere near the options that you have right now to coach your son to excellence in a particular area, an area that he's interested in, an area where we can really make him attractive in the American university marketplace. In addition, I would guess that the tuition on the private school that you're going to engage in is going to increase substantially. If you've got a good private school that can take you all the way through graduation, stick with it. In the United States, I think your budget normally for just kind of a normal upper level private school, nothing super swanky, but also not the cheapest option. I think of private schools currently costing about $30,000 a year. There are cheaper options. You can often find very small schools that are less expensive, and there's certainly cheaper ones. But when I look at, the schools that are kind of the standard affluent professionals send their children here, $30,000 is my normal working budget right now. You're probably getting a great education for less than that. And what you can do is make up with home education what is missing at school to really help your son to develop much, much higher level performance in those areas that are the best fit for him. I think you should set as basically a mental model the idea of how can I coach my son to be admitted into an Ivy League university fairly straightforwardly and fairly easily. Now, this is, of course, not easy. This is the goal that many, many parents, especially international parents around the world, have. But why is this a goal that I think is useful to set? Quite simply, if you achieve it and fully achieve it, meaning your son is accepted into an Ivy League university in the United States, then all of your concerns are handled. First, that Ivy League university degree is powerful anywhere in the world. It's very powerful in the United States, but it's powerful anywhere in the world. It will give him the credentials that will make it much more likely that he be a 1% performer in Brazil or in Italy or in any other country in the world, and including the United States. It will also open up doors to him that you yourself will not be able to open up. If you were to go to the United States and start out from scratch in some random city, it would take a lot of time for you to build the networking connections, the opportunities for your son that you would like to build that would ultimately lead him to long-term success that you're hoping for. When a student is at an Ivy League university, especially if he's getting good coaching, there is never a time in his life where more money is being spent on him and invested in him, and more resources are being invested into him than that period of life. The connections are enormous. The resources are huge. Just everything is opened up and poured onto him when he's at one of those schools. I also like this as a mental model because gaining admission to an Ivy League university comes with the assurance that financially everything will work out. Going to school in the United States for college can often be an extremely expensive proposition for international families. It will still be cheaper for you to pay international tuition to send your son to school in the United States than for you to move your entire family to the United States for the long term, unless you really just wanted to be there. But strategically, even though international tuition is high for American universities, you just simply paying that out of your income and out of your wealth will probably go a long way towards accomplishing what you're trying to accomplish and be cheaper than most other options. However, the Ivy League universities have such significant university funds that basically they have explicit and implicit guarantees that any student that they accept will be able to attend their university regardless of the financial situation of the students' families. Sometimes they state this publicly. My favorite is Columbia University. Columbia University states something like, if you make less than $60,000 per year and you get accepted to Columbia, you're going to come tuition free. Other universities have other numbers, so you may pay something, but your student is going to be able to go if accepted. The final point I want to mention as to why I think this is a worthwhile consideration is that by focusing on doing what would be necessary to be accepted to a top-level Ivy League university, where your competition is enormous and your odds of getting in are very small, doing that work, I think, provides you with really good information to make other good decisions. What's necessary to get into an Ivy League university? Well, it's necessary to have good grades. Not sufficient, but necessary. It's necessary to have good grades. If your son is not capable of getting top grades, then you need to know that, and you need to be honest with that. If he is capable of getting top grades, if you have the goal or the ambition or the mental model of, my job is to help you and coach you to get admission into an Ivy League university, then that will give you what you need to stay on top of him and make certain that his ability to get good grades is not destroyed in output by his unwillingness to do the work, his laziness, that you don't let anything slip, but instead you're on him, you're coaching him, and there's never a quarter, never a semester that goes by where his grades are not top level. Your student needs to do well on standardized tests. That's not a sufficient condition for entrance to an Ivy League university, but it is a necessary condition. So once again, if you know that, then now you know what you need to do to coach him into doing well on standardized tests. You can practice, you can coach, and it's never too early to start. There's a big push for making certain that we don't overwhelm students and we don't do them too much. I think that's fine. Maybe that's true, and we need to be super careful with not overwhelming students. Okay, great, fine. On the whole, though, I don't see why we should wait on a lot of the stuff. You can practice skills and practice tests and do all that stuff without putting the wrong amounts of pressure. When I took the SAT in high school, I had no clue you could study for the thing. I had no clue you should study for the thing. I thought the whole point of it was I'm just supposed to show up, take my test, and then be done. So I showed up, I took my SAT, I took it one time, never even thought about taking it again, never even thought about improving my score. Not the brightest bulb in the box. Sorry about that. I've hopefully learned a few things. Today, I do several times a week. We practice 10 or 15 minutes of SAT stuff with my eldest. And I'll do this with all of my children, where we just practice some questions. And it's a skill set where you get better at it. Obviously, a lot of it is basic and your ability, but it's a skill set that we work at. And so practice testing. Now, the key thing is simply that in order for you to be admitted to an Ivy League university, you need good grades, you need good test scores, but you also need to have world-class performance in an area that is going to be interesting to the Ivy League colleges. I've spent a lot of time researching and learning about this space. I would recommend to you and urge you to read a book called High School Superstar by Cal Newport. That is the one go-to resource that I recommend to people. There's lots of good stuff online. I've taken a couple of classes from people that do coaching to the Ivy League. I understand the system, I think, pretty well. At its core, you've got to develop what is often referred to as a spike. You've got to develop an area where your student is uniquely qualified and can prove very high-level performance and very high-level outcomes. And that's going to probably require some coaching from you, which is, again, why I'm skeptical that you would be better off in the United States engaged with adjusting to all of those things if you could follow this alternative path and your son could go to college in the United States at a prestigious college. So you really want to read High School Superstar, coach your son through developing that, and start doing that, be doing that now at 12, so that at 18 or 19, he is world-class in one area. And what I love about that is that if we do this right, not with the wrong kind of pressure, but we do this right, then ideally we should be producing a very strong, healthy, qualified, interested student who is world-class at an area of personal interest. And even if the student is denied access to some prestigious university, we don't ever know why. That university could have a set of policies that they just deny access to this student. That's no problem. I'm not going to get emotionally involved in that decision. This student will be well coached into having all of the success skills that are necessary for success in Brazil or in the United States or in any country in the world, and will also be a highly desirable candidate to an entire world of options and opportunities. Now, I'm not going to go deeply into world colleges, but on the whole, if your student is highly qualified, the world is full of universities that will help to launch him to the next level. American universities are world-class. They're fantastic. European universities are also world-class and fantastic and often much more accessible. And so I think kind of having a dual, I've always had this dual idea of American universities, and also I've spent a lot of time understanding the European university system and teaching my children languages so they can have access to the European university system. The great thing about the European university system is often the finances work out better, because if you can pass the admittedly difficult entrance examinations and do well on those, then often the finances stop being the problem for your children's university attendance. And then that's to say nothing of even Asian opportunities. Asian universities are really coming out and becoming very, very attractive in a way that they were not 10 or 20 years ago. In the hard sciences, especially engineering, Chinese universities are doing extremely well, producing very qualified students. There's all kinds of pathways through this thing, is my point. So to me, the obvious solution is stay where you are and spend your time coaching your son to be a very desirable candidate for colleges. And that coaching in and of itself will be the thing that is likely to lead your son to having a much higher confidence of being top 1% in Brazil or anywhere in the world. This solution, in my mind, is a solution that is doable for when a father is very engaged. If you follow the path of education that I've followed, write to me privately. I'm happy to recommend more resources and things like I can recommend them publicly. High School Superstar is good. I've read a bunch of other books about it. There's a bunch of stuff online. I've really enjoyed. I just took the course by a guy that I followed on YouTube for a long time. I forget his name. I don't know his name. He goes on YouTube as Quantum Boy. He has graduated with his PhD from Harvard University, and he just launched a digital course called iteachivy.com. I took that course. I thought it was fantastic, really well done. iteachivy.com. I don't have an affiliate link or anything for it. Just thought it was a great course. At its core, it's profoundly simple of what's necessary. What's necessary is you've got to work really, really hard to be really, really good. And something difficult. That's it. That's what's necessary. And there's more to it, but that's what I think is the appropriate path. Now, final path I want to go down. I think whenever there's something that I can do, and the cost of doing it is relatively modest, I generally will do that. So I've never gotten an E2 or an EB3 visa from the United States. I don't know what that process is like. I've never heard a positive story about the ease of working with the U.S. immigration system. It seems to be just a completely messed up marketplace. What I have done is I have gone ahead and done the immigration process for countries that I had a passing interest in, where I thought, okay, I can do this. I think this would be something I don't think I want to move here in the future, but I don't want to lose this opportunity. So let me go ahead and start the process. So if these visas are something that you could do, then go ahead and try it. Try it out. There's no reason not to do it. And if you could line up the paperwork and it would lead to everybody having these opportunities, then go for it. I think that when you reach the age that you have a 12-year-old son, you should be able to understand enough about what your relationships are like in Brazil and relationships would be like in other places, and then have a good sense of, is this for our family or not? You should be mature enough and it should be obvious to you whether you should go or shouldn't go. But if you think you could go and it's just a matter of the paperwork, then try it. Have your wife work to see if she could find a dream job in an American university. What could she really bring to an American university that could be kind of the reason you would choose a certain place in the United States? go ahead and get started on what that business would be for an E2 visa, or what the EB3 job and business would be. And if the money is doable and it's just, a few $1,000s, go ahead and start the process, because it could be that things get really bad in Brazil 2 years from now. And 2 years from now, it could be a nightmare. I don't know, but it's possible. And so what I would observe is just to say, how could you amp up your plan B? Is there a way that you could access dollars in your business income in some way from the United States and earn in dollars, save in dollars, and just keep all that money in the United States instead of bringing it home to Brazil? Is there a way that you can hold more of your wealth in dollars? I think you should have a full escape plan from Brazil, and that escape plan involving the United States in some way is probably a really smart move. And there's all kinds of ways where this could work out fine for you to go, and you can get these benefits plus many other benefits that could be had from being physically present inside the United States. The reason I often don't recommend this as highly as perhaps some others might is that I understand the things that are difficult in the United States. Relationships are often difficult in the United States, especially for Latinos. Latin Americans who go to the United States, they appreciate often how kind and friendly and warm-hearted Americans are. But U.S. Americans are busy all the time. And so the idea of just having time to hang out is not something that Americans ever do. That's just culturally very, very abnormal. Recently, I was talking with some Latin Americans, and they were talking about the United States, and I tried to plan. The guy had gone and lived in Texas for a while, and I got to plan something, but I got to plan something 3 months out for a social event, and it's hard for them for Latin Americans to get used to kind of the very structured, very busy lifestyles that Americans seem to thrive on. And so that can be really isolating for you, really isolating for your wife. If you leave your friends and all of a sudden you try to meet new people and you realize they're all too busy to get to know me. And so you wind up being very, very lonely. This can be improved if you have a connection to the community. And so the natural connection is usually going to be a job or a university. A university is ideal, but some kind of job. If you don't have a job, then you've got to have a set of other activities that are going to really help you engage in the community. For me, it's church. I'll go to a local church, and all of a sudden there's hundreds of people there that I'm probably going to have some things in common with, probably going to be able to build relationships fairly quickly. We're going to share a lot of similar values, and it's going to be pretty easy. If you go to church, great. If you don't go to church, then that's going to be a problem. And what can you replace that with? Some people, it's, a CrossFit gym. But all that stuff really matters. There are other aspects of the United States. Not being from Sao Paulo, you know what it's like to be in a huge city where transportation is difficult. But at its core, it'll be difficult for you probably to transition from gated community lifestyle in Brazil to gated community lifestyle in the United States. When I think about going to the United States, I think about the United States being cheap. It's totally cheap if you're willing to rent a 2-bedroom apartment in an apartment community of some kind. Pretty cheap. Life can be pretty inexpensive in that situation. But all of a sudden, if you are trying to get yourself to an equivalent lifestyle of a home in a gated community that has land, then now that's going to be pretty expensive, especially if you're in the kinds of places that you're most likely to land. Where would you probably wind up as a Brazilian? Well, the capital of the Americas, which is Miami. That would be the obvious solution, where you're going to have lots and lots of Brazilians, lots and lots of other Latin Americans around, culturally, lots of things, lots of opportunities. That's going to be a pretty expensive lifestyle. Miami is expensive. Real estate costs a lot of money. Cars are the same as they are in the United States, everywhere, but cheap. But then car insurance is through the roof. Everything is expensive there. And so, but it could be very culturally accommodating. Meanwhile, you move to some place that has lower cost of living, Midwest, Southwest, the South somewhere, or, upper New York State. These places are really inexpensive, but then they're can be very culturally isolated. So those things are a big deal. And then the money of earning money in the United States and living on it, it can quickly flow out, especially if you're doing things like private schools and all of that stuff. And so it can pretty quickly turn into a treadmill. Now, you can navigate that, but it's just a matter of knowing how to navigate it effectively and knowing what's important to you and what you can give up. I think the United States can be the cheapest place in the world to live, but it's not going to be that way if you're living in downtown Miami. And it's certainly not going to be that way if you are expecting to do it in a gated community and a private school. So in conclusion, I think your third option, that's a win-win-win all around, is not for your whole family to go to the United States, but rather for you to prepare your son and send him to school there. That process of preparation will be good at helping him to develop the skills needed to succeed in Brazil at a high level, as well as the skills needed to go succeed in any corner of the world. And along the way, there are all kinds of other schools and other opportunities all around the world that he could take advantage of. I think going abroad for school is a good idea and something that can be, in many cases, encouraged. Meanwhile, you go ahead and start working your way down that pathway. But go look at it as a plan B, and do as much plan B stuff as you can without fully committing to it. And then you're going to have to involve your wife, and you're going to have to involve her job. So work on that and see if there's some way that she's interested in getting a job. And if she's able to get a job, that would change everything about the situation. And by the way, that would change everything about the situation probably to such a degree that even if it were a temporary relocation for your family and you knew you were going to go back to Brazil, you would probably do it. What would that look like, right? If she got a job in the United States, then you would feel much more confident yourself as somebody who could start a business. Okay, I'll start a business, but at least she's going to have something she's engaged with, and we can make friends along the way. Then that college will probably, as part of her compensation package, offer her a discounted tuition rate for your son. So now having access to a college tuition in the United States for cheap or for free really changes things. And then there'll be obvious decisions on where we live based upon her college, where she would be working. All of that would be set up and kind of obvious for you. And then it would be also relatively obvious if you moved there for 5 or 7 years, you would have summers off where you travel back to Brazil, visit with your friends. You know you have vacation time. You know you have the ability to do that. Your son gets his degree. Maybe in that process, depending on how the visa stuff work, you can arrange some form of permanent residency leading to citizenship for everybody, or at least a green card with permanency, and boom, you're off to the races. So I think that's where you want to be focused, is thinking about those other ties and pooling them together. Anyway, thanks for the question. I love it. I hope that helps. That's something what I've learned from my wanders. It ain't as straightforward as it seems. It can be really good, but it requires good, thoughtful, effective planning.